Despite Democrats being the current ones in control of the United States Senate, holding 51 Senate seats to Republicans at 49, according to the betting markets, it seems inevitable that the Democratic Party will lose control of the Senate, as they only have a 12% chance of winning the Senate outright compared to the Republican Party at a 71% chance. So in today's video, we'll be taking you through my prediction for the 2024 Senate elections. Now, firstly, let's start off with the Republican states. Republicans currently have a fundamental advantage. They only hold 11 of the 34 seats up for contention, and the majority of those seats are in deep red states. Additionally, Republicans only need 13 of the 34 seats to win an outright majority, while Democrats need to win at least 23 of the 34 seats if they want Senate control. Republicans are essentially guaranteed to win the states of Utah, Wyoming, Nebraska, and its special election. Though the Nebraska's at-large is slightly competitive according to some betting markets, it's still going to be safe Republican. North Dakota, Missouri, Tennessee, Indiana, Mississippi, and West Virginia are all considered safe states for the Republican Party. Now, as of right now, they've already got a flip in the United States Senate, that being the state of West Virginia. Now, in 2018, the Democratic candidate for West Virginia Senate, Joe Manchin, defeated Republican Patrick Morrisey by just over 3%. However, Manchin is not running for re-election after polls show him heavily trailing the Republican candidate, and considering the fact that West Virginia voted for Trump by 40% in 2020, this will not be a competitive race. Now, on the Democratic side, they also have a lot of safe seats as well: Washington, California, Hawaii, Maryland, Delaware, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, and the state of Maine. Now, Vermont and Maine have independent senators, but since those independent senators are even more liberal than the average establishmentarian Democrat, I'm just going to be labeling them as Democratic senators. Additionally, the state of New York also in the safe blue column. Now, as you can see, there are 13 states that are deemed at least mildly competitive, and Republicans only need 3 to win the majority, while Democrats need at least 11 and perhaps 12. Now, I'm going to fill in some likely states for both parties. These are seats that are expected to go for both sides by 5% or more, but not necessarily by safe margins, although essentially most people can agree that these states will go in their respective directions. Now, for Democrats, they have 4 likely seats: New Mexico, Minnesota, New Jersey, and Virginia. These are kind of like the obvious likely seats that Democrats would obtain because all these seats voted for Joe Biden by more than 5% in 2020. New Jersey voted for Democrats by 17, the state of Virginia voted for Democrats by 10, New Mexico by a similar margin, and Minnesota by the tightest of them all, but still by 7% margin, and the Democratic incumbent, Amy Klobuchar, is very popular in the state of Minnesota. Now we're going to go to some of the likely Republican seats, and there are only 2 as opposed to the 4 that Democrats have, but these 2 would put the Republicans at 50, the states of Texas and Florida. Now, both of these seats, currently speaking, have Republican incumbents who are not necessarily the most popular. If you look at the 2018 results of both those states, those were very competitive seats in 2022. Ted Cruz, the Republican incumbent, who is grossly unpopular in his home state, won by just a 2.6% margin, while Rick Scott, the former governor of Florida, defeated Democrat Bill Nelson by just 0.2%. However, Florida has heavily shifted towards the Republicans since then, and also the state of Texas doesn't seem to be that competitive in this election cycle because, again, Democrats don't have that strong a candidate. Colin Allred isn't bad, but he's not particularly appealing, and it does seem like that the Republican Party will win the state of Texas on the presidential level by a huge margin. So it should be expected that Ted Cruz should be able to win re-election, and Rick Scott should be able to win re-election in Florida by pretty comfortable margins. Now, that does put the Republicans to 50, which means they need just 1 seat to control the Senate. Now, the most obvious state of these 7 swing states where the Republicans could pick up a Senate seat would obviously be the state of Montana. In 2020, Donald Trump won the state of Montana on the presidential level by 16.4%. Now, Jon Tester is indisputably a popular incumbent. In 2018, he won against Matt Rosendale, the Republican, to win on a 3rd term by a margin of 3.5%. However, there are several factors to consider in this race. Firstly, this was not a presidential election year, which means that the turnout in general was generally down. And that could be probably better for the candidate who is in the state that is favoring the opposition because voters aren't as engaged and therefore turnout is lower, and it favors the popular candidate over the candidate that has a broad support over the state, that being in this case Matt Rosendale. However, this time round, it's in a presidential year where turnout is high among Democrats and Republicans, and a lot of that Republican turnout will go for the Republican Tim Sheehy over Jon Tester. Additionally, this was a national environment year that was very favorable for Democrats. Democrats won the House generic ballot in 2018 by about 8%. This time round, the generic ballot is around tied, which means that you could expect the national environment to move roughly 8% away from Jon Tester. If you simply do that math, that means that Tester would lose by 4.5%, which is not great considering the fact that he also has to consider things like the turnout as well as the presidential election factor. Additionally, another thing that's not going very well for Jon Tester is that he doesn't have this very conservative voting record. Unlike people like Joe Manchin or even Kristen Sinema, his numbers in terms of how much he votes with Democrats and Republicans are closer to the average establishmentarian Democrat as opposed to someone like Joe Manchin, and if you bring up that voting record, it could certainly hurt him. Now obviously there's going to be some split ticket voting, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be enough, and Polymarket agrees, with Republicans or Tim Sheehy having around an 80% chance of victory against Jon Tester at just 21%. Now a few months ago it was closer to 50-50. Now as we go closer to the election, and with one recent poll suggesting that Tester is down by 7, this is certainly not looking too good for Jon Tester. Right now, I have this as likely Republican, and some people think that this will be closer as lean or tilt, but just because of polarization, I simply do not believe that Jon Tester even has a remote chance right now of holding on to that seat. Now going to the state of Nevada. Now in the state of Nevada, previously, I believe about 2 predictions ago, I had the state of Nevada as a toss-up, if not tilting towards Samuel Brown. Now I've changed my characterization. The state of Nevada right now in the betting markets, 88% chance of going to the incumbent Democrat, that being Jackie Rosen. Now the reason that I do trust Polymarket is that people put their money into this, which makes it very significant. That's because people can lie with their mouths, but they generally don't lie with their money. Now that being said, I don't believe that the Democratic winning rate is necessarily that high. If you had to force me to put money on one of these 3 options, I would go Republican because I think this race is closer to 60-40 and not 88-12. That being said, it does look like that the incumbent Democrat, Jackie Rosen, is favored. Although I do believe Trump will probably win the state of Nevada on the presidential level, it does still seem like that there will be a little bit of split ticket. Now, as I have explained, split ticket voting is going down. That being said, even a 2 or 3% split ticket will probably be enough to propel Jackie Rosen to victory. And again, she was able to defeat incumbent Republican Dean Heller by 5%. That's a pretty remarkable performance, considering the fact that incumbents are generally hard to beat in statewide offices. So the state of Nevada right now will probably go tilting towards the Democratic Party. I still consider this race competitive, and I would not agree with the characterization that was previously made on Polymarket of that 88-12 characterization, but it does seem like that Jackie Rosen will probably hang on. Now another state where Democrats will probably hang on is the state of Arizona. Arizona has historically been a more Republican state. However, Democrats have won a lot of statewide offices around the past 4 years. In the 2018, 2020, and 2022 Senate races in Arizona, Democrats have won by a margin of between 2.4% to 5%, which is generally considered quite a decent margin for a Democrat in a state that is as red as Arizona, at least historically. And Joe Biden did win the state of Arizona over Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential election. Now, the most significant reason why people generally consider Arizona leaning blue right now, with Democrat Ruben Gallego having an 85% chance of victory, is because the Republican Kari Lake is not necessarily in the best position to win. That's because she's someone who is relatively more extreme and someone who is not very well liked in the state of Arizona. Now, someone like Ruben Gallego is definitely more progressive than the average Democrat that is needed to win the state of Arizona generally possess. However, Carrie Lake is just not popular enough, and she wasn't even able to defeat Katie Hobbs, someone who was frankly rightfully characterized as someone who simply stayed in her basement. And even then, Carrie Lake wasn't able to pull it off in 2024. So in 2024, it's going to be slightly more difficult for her than in 2022, even though in 2022 she still ended up losing. So Arizona right now will definitely go to the Democratic Party, I'd argue by about 2%, which is a lean margin. Now another state where Democrats have a really poor shot of actually winning is the state of Ohio. In the states of Ohio and Montana, Ohio definitely gives the Democrats a more decent probability of actually retaining it. However, the state is very Republican presidentially. In 2020, despite the fact that Biden won the popular vote by 4.5%, the state of Ohio still voted for Donald Trump by over 8%, and this time around in 2024, I definitely expect Trump to carry the state by over 12 percentage points, which makes Sherrod Brown's task a lot more challenging. Now, again, unlike the state of Montana, where Republicans have a pretty strong candidate, Tim Sheehy, the Republican candidate for Ohio is arguably a bit lackluster, Bernie Moreno. Now, that being said, Republicans have been generally leading by a little bit in the betting markets, which is something that's very telling. And although polling right now does suggest that Sherrod Brown is ahead, he's consistently below 50% in some of those polls, and generally the undecided voters are oftentimes Republicans, which means that you probably expect most of those undecideds to vote for Trump, and by extension vote for Bernie Moreno. Now, ultimately, Ohio will still be hard fought, but as of right now, I'd still give the Republican Party a lean advantage in the state of Ohio. Now, this state could certainly end up tightening up, but right now, I still believe that the Republican Party, Bernie Moreno, is favored against Sherrod Brown just because of polarization and the lack of split ticket. Now, going to the state of Wisconsin. In the state of Wisconsin right now, despite the fact I again think the state will go for Donald Trump, going to the state of Wisconsin. Currently in the betting markets, Democrats enjoy an 82% chance of winning, while the Republicans are stuck at 19%. And again, although I do believe the probabilities overestimate the Democratic Party, I would have to agree that the Democratic Party is favored to win the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin's Democratic incumbent senator, Tammy Baldwin, is very popular. In 2018, she was able to defeat the Republican candidate by 10.8%, which means that she overperformed the national environment and the generic ballot for Democrats by 3 points, which means that, again, she's someone who's quite popular. And although you could expect the Republican Party to do better in 2024, especially with Trump on the ballot in some of these more white working class areas as well as some of the more rural counties, I'd still expect Tammy Baldwin to hang on. She's very popular, and I believe that Trump might be able to win the state by maybe 2%, but 2% is nowhere close to be enough for a lot of these Wisconsin voters to actually end up dumping Tammy Baldwin. You're probably going to see like 3 to 4% split ticket, and you're going to see someone like Tammy Baldwin win by 4 to 5 points, especially because she's still more appealing with some of those working class voters, and she's probably going to be able to do better than Kamala Harris in a lot of these rural areas by pretty substantial margins. So as of right now, Wisconsin is still leaning blue. Now, another state that is leaning blue is the state of Michigan. Although Michigan does not have an incumbent because its current incumbent senator from the state of Michigan, Debbie Stabenow, decided to retire. However, her likely successor and Democratic candidate Elisa Slotkin is still widely popular in the state. She's a historical overperformer, steadily overperforming Democratic presidential candidates by about 4 to 5%, which makes her suited to win the state. Additionally, the Republican candidate Mike Rogers is a retired representative. That's never something of a good sign, just because of the fact that retired candidates oftentimes rarely end up winning, and a lot of these Republicans who had a chance to challenge Elisa Slotkin declined, showing that Republicans are not super confident in their chances in Michigan. Additionally, Michigan is out of the 3 Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, probably the bluest of the 3 states. And right now, it does look like that Kamala Harris might end up carrying the state of Michigan, and you can only expect Elisa Slotkin to overperform Kamala Harris. So as of right now, I definitely do have Michigan right now in the lean blue column. Now finally, the last state on this map is the state of Pennsylvania. And what a great state to wrap up this video. In 2020, this was a tipping point state, and is again expected to be a tipping point state on the presidential level in 2024. Biden won the state by 70,000 votes. Now, this is definitely an ultra-competitive state on the presidential level, but on the Senate level, at least with Bob Casey, the state has not been all that competitive. In 2018, Bob Casey, the incumbent Democrat, won re-election by 13% over Republican Lou Barletta. Now, of course, Republicans kind of gave up this race, and that was why the margin was so wide. But even if Republicans actually put tens of millions of dollars, or even $100 million in Pennsylvania, the state will probably still went for Bob Casey by at least 5%. Now, this election is a bit different because this is a presidential election year, and you're going to see increased Republican turnout. The problem here for the Republican Dave McCormick is that Republicans don't have the best record in the state of Pennsylvania. At least in 2022, John Fetterman, who was much weaker of a candidate than someone like Bob Casey, who was kind of an institution in the state, still won against Republican amendment odds by about 5%. Now, of course, Dave McCormick is a better candidate than Mehmet Oz, but still, it doesn't look too promising for him. Additionally, again, what we see with Bob Casey is that he's able to do the best in where Democrats are struggling right now, those white working class voters. Take the example of 2022 of Erie County. In Erie County, this is a great example, but Bob Casey won Erie County by 18%. Now compare that with 2020, where Joe Biden only won the county by 1, and in 2016, Hillary Clinton actually lost the county to Donald Trump. This is a perfect example of white working class voters turning out and voting for Bob Casey. Or another example, Joe Biden was born in Lackawanna County, but he only won the county by 8. But just 2 years ago, in 2018, you saw Bob Casey won the county by 23%. And this is the type of area that Bob Casey is able to do very well. Despite the fact that Trump will definitely pull him down a little bit in some of these areas, he's still going to be able to win these counties by relatively large margins and end up winning the statewide office. And as of right now, I still have Pennsylvania in the lean blue column, which kind of wraps up this video, and Democrats at 48 seats and Republicans at 52. Now, in summary, this video kind of reaffirms what we already know. All Republicans need to do to win the Senate is essentially carry all the states they currently have, 49 Senate seats, which are these dark red seats, plus the states of Texas and Florida, which is essentially a piece of cake, pick up the state of West Virginia, which is essentially a guarantee, and then pick up one of the states of Montana, Ohio, or any one of these blue states, which is quite frankly very doable. Now, however, Democrats do still hold most of these more competitive seats in the Rust Belt, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. They're also favored to win Nevada and Arizona. That's kind of the consensus that's been going around here. Most people believe that Republicans will win between 51 and 52 Senate seats. And right now, I definitely do side with most pundits. I believe Republicans will likely win 52 seats, plus or minus 1. I really don't believe that Montana is really doable for Democrats. Jon Tester is almost certainly going to lose. And I do believe that Ohio, Nevada, and by extension Arizona are really the most competitive Senate races in this election cycle, with Nevada, in my opinion, as of right now, being the only tilt state, which means Nevada is the only state I expect to be decided by less than 2%. Otherwise, I'm relatively confident with my map. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.